Today we're stepping into kind of a hushed, atmospheric space to uncover the multi-layered mysteries of a place that is absolutely notorious in military lore, and that's Baumholder, Germany. You know, for decades, the troops stationed here haven't just shared stories of really rigorous training. They've passed down these whispered, terrifying accounts of what happens when the sun goes down. So we're going to peel back the layers of this sprawling military base, exploring the paranormal folklore, the chilling true crime reality, and the heavy historical facts that anchor the whole shebang.
So does Baumholder, Germany actually have haunted locations? Okay, let's dive into this, because the answer isn't a simple yes. Baumholder houses Smith Barracks, which is this sprawling U.S. Army post built directly over a former Nazi military base. And unlike your typical, civilian ghost tours, the haunted locations here are centralized entirely within this historic military infrastructure and the really dense, fog-heavy forests that surround it. It's literally an absolute hotbed of urban legends that have been passed down through generations of soldiers.
When you take in the imposing, cold, concrete architecture of Smith Barracks, it's easy to see how this Nazi-era construction sets a naturally unsettling stage. For instance, right beneath the Rheinlander Community Club, there's this labyrinth of dark, damp, subterranean catacombs, and rumors persist of torture chambers and hastily buried bodies down there. Now, the military officially deny these rumors, of course, but base facility managers themselves admit to some really unexplained anomalies. Most notably, there's this inexplicable 4-foot-high dirt mound sitting totally isolated in a brick-walled gallery, and it has absolutely no architectural reason to be there. Weird, right?
Section 1. Terror in the Quarters. Infantry versus Family Housing.
That brings us to our next layer. Why are the specific living quarters on this base so heavily steeped in lore? Well, the reports aren't just random, they're actually highly localized and drastically different depending on exactly which part of the base you sleep in. On one hand, we've got the 1-6 Infantry Barracks, which houses single soldiers. Veterans here report a really hostile, aggressive energy. We're talking about soldiers waking up literally pinned to their beds by sleep paralysis shadow figures, hearing disembodied growls, and, terrifyingly, experiencing these entities following them home across the Atlantic after their deployment. Absolutely wild. But then, contrast that with Wetzel family housing. Over here, military families report a totally different vibe. Creepy, precise manipulation. It's meticulous domestic poltergeist activity. Think kitchen cabinets opening in perfect unison, children's toys being neatly lined up by color without any human intervention, and electronics just blaring at maximum volume at 2 in the morning, even with the batteries removed. No way, right?
Section 2. The Serial Killer Medic, Jeffrey Dahmer at Smith Barracks.
Now, we actually need to radically shift our tone for a minute, moving from supernatural folklore to a serious, undeniably chilling true crime reality. Because the darkness at Baumholder isn't just confined to ghost stories. It was briefly home to one of America's most infamous serial killers. The circumstantial overlap between Jeffrey Dahmer and Baumholder is honestly chilling. Think about the timeline. In 1978, Dahmer commits his first murder in Ohio. Just 1 year later, in 1979, he's deployed right here to Smith Barracks as a combat medic. Crucially, during his exact window of deployment, from 1979 to 1981, 5 unsolved local mutilation murders occurred in the surrounding region. He was eventually discharged early in '81 for severe, persistent alcohol abuse. And while the FBI and German authorities heavily investigated these cold cases after his later arrest and the timeline matched up perfectly, they just never found definitive physical evidence to officially charge him for the German cases.
But, the story doesn't end with police files. Decades later, in 2022, Dahmer's former Army medic roommates actually came forward, and they detailed some horrific accounts of being psychologically terrorized, drugged, and assaulted by him while stationed there. Most alarmingly, one roommate explicitly claimed to have seen Dahmer returning to the Smith Barracks late at night completely covered in blood. It really grounds the supernatural urban legends of this base in undeniable historical human evil.
Section 3. The Haunted Baumholder Woods, Echoes in the Fog.
Let's leave the concrete barracks behind for a second and head out into the desolate, fog-heavy tree lines surrounding the military training area. Because out here, isolation breeds a completely different kind of terror. To understand it, we have to define a terrifying piece of centuries-old continental folklore called the Aufhocker. It translates to the leap upon, and it's classified as a Druckgeist, or a pressure spirit. According to local myth, this is a predatory shapeshifter that targets vulnerable, isolated individuals under the cover of darkness. And it doesn't just scare you, it literally weaponizes gravity and psychological terror. An Aufhocker attack typically builds in 4 distinct phases. First, there's the stalking phase, where it waits at deep forest pathways or crossroads. Second is the leap. Disguised as maybe an animal or an old woman, it launches directly onto the victim's back. Third is the compounding wait. You just cannot shake it off. With every single step you take, it feeds on your panic and grows exponentially heavier. And finally, the outcome is almost always collapse from total physical exhaustion or even suffocation. Now, what's so fascinating to me is how this ancient myth seamlessly blends into modern military field panic. Soldiers out on exhausting night marches in Baumholder report what they call the rucksack phenomenon. It's this sudden, crushing, unnatural downward pressure on their gear that goes way, way beyond standard physical fatigue. And these woods are alive with more than just pressure spirits. Modern troops doing land navigation out in these dense trees constantly report hearing phantom heavy boots marching, or the deep rumble of tank treads approaching. Yet, when they check their night vision optics, the woods are completely empty, nothing there. They report disembodied screams and impossibly tall, unnaturally fast shadow figures just darting between the trees. It leaves them with this primitive, intense feeling of being actively hunted.
Section 4. The Dark History Beneath. Displacement and POW camps.
We're pivoting now to the final and perhaps most absolutely crucial layer of our explainer. Why do these woods and barracks feel so incredibly heavy? Well, it's because of the grim, factual history that permanently stained this topography during World War II. 29,000. That's a huge number. In 1937, the Third Reich aggressively appropriated over 29,000 acres of land in this region to build their sprawling military troop drilling grounds. It was a massive, sudden takeover of ancestral land. And to get those 29,000 acres, they wiped out 14. 14 historic German villages were completely cleared out, with the residents forcibly evicted. Whole towns were simply abandoned and used for target practice. Even today, soldiers navigating the woods still stumble upon these literal ghost towns. Hidden stone foundations, staircases leading to nowhere, and forgotten wells that have been entirely swallowed by the forest.
But the destruction of those villages was really just the beginning. From 1941 to 1945, Baumholder was partially converted into a prisoner of war camp. It held Soviet, Polish, and other Allied captives. These prisoners were funneled into brutal forced labor, literally maintaining the very tank tracks that tore up the earth. In accordance with Nazi directives, there was strict segregation, and the Eastern European prisoners faced horrific conditions. We're talking starvation-level rations, freezing winters in poorly insulated stables, and rampant, deadly outbreaks of typhus. By 1945, as U.S. forces approached, the camp administrators forced sick and emaciated prisoners onto deadly evacuation marches in the biting cold before Patton's army could finally liberate the installation.
Even after liberation, the trauma baked into this soil just didn't end. 15,000. That's the number of people packed in here next. The hilltops of Baumholder were rapidly converted into a massive transit camp for upwards of 15,000 displaced persons. It became a chaotic, overcrowded landscape of suffering, housing traumatized survivors, former forced laborers, and refugees dealing with immense grief and survival anxiety. So the crucial takeaway here is this: when you see modern soldiers standing near these historic structures today, you have to realize they are walking, sleeping, and training on intensely traumatized ground. It really forces us to synthesize the heavy historical facts we just covered with the residual supernatural lore that seems to plague the troops stationed there right now.
It is so often said that the Baumholder Woods retain a literal memory, and the crushing psychological weight of this location's dark past perfectly mirrors the suffocating physical weight of that Aufhocker folklore we talked about earlier. The displacement of families, the suffering of POWs, the anxiety of refugees, and the high-stress energy of modern military training, it's like it is all baked right into the very concrete and soil of Smith Barracks.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought. When soldiers report shadowy figures, aggressive sleep paralysis, and phantom screams in the fog, are these hauntings truly supernatural? Or are they simply the inescapable psychological echoes of profound human tragedy vibrating through the ages? It's a haunting question for sure, but understanding the factual history behind the folklore ensures we never forget the real human lives that shape this dark terrain. Keep exploring the history around you guys, because as we've seen today, the past is rarely as quiet as we think.